Good morning and welcome to this online discussion of your test paper, that is your test 9, which was nothing but your science and technology. The first question was, the solution to fighting poverty is not mass production but production by the masses. So this was what something Gandhiji spoke about. Okay, this is what something Gandhiji spoke about. That is, the solution to fight poverty is not mass production but production by the masses. The question further asked, elucidate with respect to technology with a human face and the Gandhian model of development. Now, again, you will be able to answer this question only if you know this concept, that is technology with a human face. If you don't understand what is technology with a human face, you will not be able to go ahead with writing this particular answer. Now, the question wants you to talk about technology with a human face as well as the Gandhian model of development in order to explain what was Gandhiji saying when he said the solution to fighting poverty is not mass production but production by the masses. So what is Gandhiji trying to say here? Explain that based on the technology with a human face and also explain what is the Gandhian model of development. Okay, so here introduction could be explain what is technology with a human face and also what does Gandhiji mean by solution to fighting poverty was not by mass production but production by the masses. Okay, so first of all, you can start by writing that this phrase, that is technology with a human face, was given by an economist by the name E.F. Schumacher. It was given by an economist by the name E.F. Schumacher in his book Small is Beautiful. Small is Beautiful, a study of economics, a study of economics as if people mattered. As if people mattered. So, in his book, Schumacher kind of expresses fear and concern about the inhuman nature of modern technology, where this modern technology is leading the world from one crisis to another. Rather, what E.F. Schumacher says is that we need a technology with a human face. So, what do you understand by this phrase technology with a human face? Technology with a human face means a kind of self help technology, a kind of self help technology which does not take away the skill and productivity of humans. It does not take away the skill and productivity of humans, but rather it rather encourages humans, that is both young and old, to use their mind and creativity in their everyday life. So what E.F. Schumacher is basically trying to say is that technology should be simplifying human life. It should be simplifying human life, not complicated. Not complicated. It should help humans to apply their mind and body, not take away their productivity and skill. Not take away the productivity and skill. See, for example, you had recent pandemic now. Okay. So, thanks to your COVID-19, you had lockdown, which extended up to around 5 to 6 months, where everything was shut down. Now, when everything was shut down, many people lost their jobs. Many laborers, migrant people from the lower strata, low income groups, most of them struggled to even have to place enough food on their table, even struggle to earn enough money so as to sustain their household. But at the same time, you would have noted that the world's richest, they increased their net worth tremendously. They increased their net worth tremendously. Jeff Bezos increased his net worth tremendously. Elon Musk, where he was somewhere around 30 or 40 billion dollars, he is now worth more than 90 billion dollars. You would have read about Mukesh Ambani earning crores of rupees every minute. So most of the rich actually benefited from the lockdown. The rich were able to enhance their network, they were able to enhance their expanse, business, productivity, everything they were able to do it. But at the same time, most of the people who did not belong to that rich class, they struggled to meet, they struggled to continue with their livelihood. So that is the question, what was happening, what is happening here? The reason is that the rich depend upon modern technology, and they were able to expand this modern technology because they had the means, they had enough resources, whereas people from the lower levels, they did not have access to modern technology, they were not involved in making use of modern technology, therefore they were not able to live up to the present day challenges. So now the catch over here is that if you want access to modern technology, you'll have to invest. In order to invest, you need money. So what I'm trying to say is that only the rich are able to make use of modern technology, only the rich are able to invest in modern technology, and when they do that, they are taking away jobs from the rest of the people. For example, mass production itself, as Gandhiji is talking over here. So, say for example, take up automation. Okay, take up automation in a car factory where you are manufacturing vehicles. So if you have automation, you are replacing humans with machines. Now, who is able to invest in automation? Only the rich are able to invest in automation. And when you invest in automation, you are taking away jobs from people. But thanks to automation, you are able to rapidly produce more, you are able to increase production. So that is what Gandhiji is trying to say here. If you want to fight poverty, you don't need mass production, but you need production by the masses. So if we are investing more and more in modern technology, it would mean that we are taking away jobs from the poor. That is what technology with a human face is actually talking about. And that is why we need a Gandhian model of development. We need Gandhian model of development. So here you can talk about Article 43, for example. See, Gandhiji said that India lives in its villages. India lives in her villages. This is where Article 43 comes in. That is your nothing but your DPSP, which talks about promotion of cottage industries, cooperation in rural areas, development of villages. Because the Gandhian model of development is based on voluntary democratic functioning of our society. So this is how you need to relate these concepts and write your answer, where you can conclude by saying that we need modern technology, which should not complicate life, but enhance human lives, enhance and encourage humans to lead a comfortable life by not taking away their productivity or creativity, but by helping humans to apply their mind and body to work. I hope you've understood what this question is asking about and what you're supposed to write for this particular question. Second question. Now, the second question says, what is digital divide? What are the factors responsible for digital divide, and how can this gap be bridged? Now, this is a pretty straightforward question. It is a pretty straightforward question. So how will you start with this particular question? You will simply take up the first part. That is, what is digital divide? Then the body will comprise of the second part of the question, that is, what are the factors responsible for digital divide, and you will conclude the answer by suggesting how we can bridge this gap. It's a pretty straightforward question. Take up these three parts of the question one by one, and your answer is complete. Okay, so I think I'm pretty sure you know what is digital divide. You can start by writing the importance of in ICT, that is information and communication technology. Why is information and communication technology important? That is, it helps in economic development, it helps in job creation, it helps in national development, it helps in education. Various other examples you'll be able to give. Various other examples you'll be able to give. The World Bank actually came out with a study, and the World Bank said that for every 10% increase in internet penetration, for every 10% increase in internet penetration, the GDP of the country will increase by 1.4%. So you are able to understand why it is important for us to bridge this gap known as digital divide. So simply you'll explain digital divide. What is it? Nothing but the inequality where the world can be divided into people who have access to modern technology and those who do not have access to modern technology. Or you can divide the world into those who have the capacity to use modern technology or those who do not have the capacity to use modern technology. So after explaining what is digital divide, you can just simply mention the various forms in which digital divide exists. Example, digital divide may exist between the rich and the poor. It may exist between rural areas and urban areas. It may exist between educated class and uneducated class. It may exist between developed and underdeveloped, undeveloped nations. Say, for example, internet penetration is more in urban areas. Internet penetration is very poor in rural areas. Therefore, in urban areas, those living in urban areas have more access to information and knowledge, whereas when compared to those living in rural areas. This is nothing but your digital divide. This is nothing but your digital divide. Following this, you'll take up with the body where you'll explain the various factors responsible for digital divide. So many of the factors responsible for digital divide is already given in your key answer. You can simply go through that. It could be due to poor education. It could be due to low income levels. Again, urban rural divide, or it could be gender divide. For example, in India, men are considered to be more proficient in technology when compared to women. It could also be access to technology, or it could be linguistic. See, most of your modern information technology, if you want to use it, you should be able to read and understand English. So if you are not able to read and understand English, you will find it difficult to use modern technology. And this can once again lead to the gap known as digital divide. So you can have many other reasons. It could be government policies, it could be infrastructure, it could be behavioral aspect. See, if you go to West Bengal, used to have this chief minister, not Mamta Banerjee. What is his name? Jyoti Basu. Jyoti Basu. Jyoti Basu was the chief minister of West Bengal for more than 20 years. For more than 20 years. But when he was the chief minister of West Bengal, he did not give importance to ICT. He gave more importance to manual work. He gave more importance to manual work. He did not invest in modernizing government work or modernizing different sectors in West Bengal. Whereas you take Bangalore, for example, why do you think Bangalore is the IT capital? Why do you think many of these multinational companies, software companies are coming to Bangalore and Hyderabad? Because we invested in modern technology, because we invested in modern technology. This is not seen in West Bengal. This is not seen in West Bengal because for more than 20 years, importance was not given to information and communication technology. Importance was not even given to computers. That is why you have more of a divide in such states when compared to states like Karnataka, where digital penetration is very high compared to other states in the country. So behavioral aspect is also important. Behavioral aspect is also important. Okay, so once you're done explaining the various factors responsible for digital divide, finally you can give your suggestions or measures as to how can we bridge this gap, how can we bridge this divide known as digital divide. So you can talk about Digital India scheme, for example. You can talk about last mile connectivity. You can talk about the role of private sector. Say, for example, the way Geo was single-handedly responsible for internet penetration up to some extent. It is only thanks to Geo that many people now have access to 4G network. 4G network. So you can talk about the role of private sector, empowerment of citizens, especially women, digital literacy in schools. All these things can be mentioned as suggestions as to how can we bridge this gap known as digital divide. Next question. India has one of the largest reserves of thorium in the world. Then why isn't India exploiting its thorium reserves to meet its energy? Very simple question. The question itself says India has one of the largest reserves of thorium. The question itself is accepting that we have large reserves of thorium. But the catch is that even though we have large reserves of thorium, why are we not exploiting this large reserves of thorium. So first of all, you should be knowing how are we supposed to make use of thorium. Can we simply use thorium instead of coal? Can we burn it in a coal-fired plant? Can we use it in a thermal power plant? No. Thorium can be used in a nuclear power plant. So first of all, you should have some knowledge about thorium. So here you can start by you can start the question by giving some information about thorium reserves in India and explain why thorium cannot be directly used in nuclear reactors. Okay, so your introduction can talk about how India has one of the largest reserves of thorium, around 3 to 8.5 lakh tons of thorium reserves is found in India in the form of monazite sands. In the form of monazite sand along the coastal belt in South India. Along the coastal belt in South India, in the form of monazite sand, we have large thorium reserves, especially in Kerala. So this thorium can be used in nuclear power plant to produce energy. But the main problem with thorium is that thorium 232 is not a fissile material. It is not a fissile material. Now, as of today, all our nuclear power plants are built to take up nuclear fission, where you have your uranium 235, which undergoes nuclear fission, breaks into two smaller parts, that is your krypton and barium, and also releases energy. So in your nuclear power plants, you have nuclear fission. So in order to undergo nuclear fission, you need a nuclear fuel, where the nuclear fuel, that is uranium 235, is a fissile material. What do you mean by fissile material? When a heavier element is able to break down into two lighter elements. But the problem with thorium 232 is that thorium 232 is not a fissile material. Therefore, it is not able to break down into two lighter elements plus give energy. That is why we are not able to exploit thorium. So next you can start with your body, where you can explain how is India planning to exploit thorium in the future. So in order to explain that, you will have to write about India's three-stage nuclear program. India has a three-stage nuclear program, where in the first stage, that is by making use of pressurized heavy water reactor, we will make use of uranium 235 to undergo nuclear fission and energy is produced. At the same time, in the same reactor, uranium 238 will be used, where uranium 238 will be converted to plutonium 239. This plutonium 239, which is obtained from the first stage, will be used in the second stage. Fast breeder reactor, where in the fast breeder reactor, plutonium 239 undergoes nuclear fission and energy is produced just like uranium 235. But in the second stage, thorium 232 is converted to uranium 233, where uranium 233 is now fissile. Hence, thorium 232 is converted to uranium 233 in the second stage, where this uranium 233 will be used in advanced heavy water reactor, and uranium 233 will undergo nuclear fission to produce energy. That is why we are not able to exploit thorium as of today, because we need enough plutonium 239 to move on to the second stage. To move on to the second stage, we need enough plutonium 239. For requiring enough plutonium 239, we need enough uranium 235 to undergo nuclear fission, because it is when you undergo this process of nuclear fission that uranium 238 gets converted to plutonium 239. If that is not happening, we will not have enough plutonium 239. Only once we have enough plutonium 239 can we convert thorium 232 to uranium 233. And only once enough thorium 232 is converted to uranium 233, can we finally move on to the third stage, where we will be able to produce energy from uranium-233, which is received from thorium-232. Meaning, for us to effectively utilize thorium-232, we first need to have enough reserves of uranium-235, and hence the government of India is hell-bent on what do you say, importing enough uranium-235 from other nations, because India does not have natural uranium-235 in large capacity. That is why India is entering into civil nuclear deal with Japan, with Australia, with USA to get technology as well as enough uranium-235, so that we can one day use thorium-232. So you can conclude the answer by saying that by following this three-stage nuclear program, thorium could be the answer to meet India's energy requirement, where the entire country may one day be powered by thorium, because if you go through India's energy policy, India's energy policy talks about three goals, where the first goal says, as of today, we will make use of fossil fuels, so that as of today, we are not compromising India's energy needs. The second goal is to invest in technologies to enhance renewable energy and to enhance the capacity to use thorium and improve our energy efficiency. The third goal of our energy policy is to make use of renewable energy and thorium to meet energy requirements and move away from fossil fuels. So you can see here, the third goal of India's energy policy is what? It is nothing but to make use of thorium along with renewable sources of energy. Okay, so this is your third answer. The fourth question is about light fidelity. So the question says, what is light fidelity? What are the applications and advantages of light fidelity? Will Li-Fi replace the use of radio waves? Okay, so again, the answer is simple. It will consist of three parts. If you are able to address all these three parts, by then you would have reached your word limit. You would have used up all the space and your answer would be complete. See, always whenever trying to write an answer, always ensure that it is a well-balanced answer. Wherever possible, always mention the merits and demerits. Say, for example, if you have light fidelity, okay, you are writing what are the applications and advantages of light fidelity. If you are writing the advantages, at least write one or two disadvantages as well. Okay, always try to write always try to come out with a balanced answer. So first you'll start with light fidelity. You'll explain what is light fidelity and what is the technology all about. This is simple. I'm pretty sure everybody would have come across light fidelity. It is nothing but to make use of visible light. Instead of radio waves as a medium to carry data. So this technology was developed by Professor Harold Haas from the University of Edinburgh. Okay, where we will make use of visible light instead of radio waves for communication, for data transmission. So how is this possible? See, just like radio waves, how are you able to communicate or transmit information or data using radio waves? You will need a transmitter which will transmit the radio waves, and you will need a receiver which will receive the radio waves. So before transmitting the radio waves, all the data is superimposed on radio waves, and then it is transmitted. Once it is received, we have to extract or we have to separate the data or information from the radio wave so that that information can be analyzed. So here, when it comes to light fidelity, it will be your LED bulb which will act as a transmitter, and a photo detector which will act as the receiver. So here, data or information will be light will act as the medium instead of radio waves to carry this data. where information is superimposed in such a way that LED bulb will have kind of a dimming and brightening of light. That dimming and brightening of light will be so fast that you will not be, to human eyes, it is not visible. It is not able for us to make you to notice that dimming and brightening of light. That dimming and brightening of light will be received by the photo detector, which will be able to convert it into binary information, that is ones and zeros. Meaning, if the light is bright, the photo detector will take it as 1. If it is dim, it will take it as 0. So what is combination of 1 and 0s? Combination of 1 and 0s is nothing but your binary digits. It is nothing but information for the computer, and this is how information can be transmitted using light or LED, light fidelity. Okay. So what are the advantages of Li-Fi? Now, one of the most important advantages is that light is available free of cost, unlike radio waves. Unlike radio waves, light is available free of cost. I've mentioned many of these advantages and applications. You can simply go through that. I'm just mentioning a few points at the top of my head. It is available free of cost. Higher frequency, meaning light is able to carry more information. It is able to transmit more information. Light fidelity can work underwater. It is not harmful like radio waves. Some people are concerned about radio towers, saying that radio waves can lead to cancer, for example. Not it is there's still allegations, not true as such, because there is no proof, but still people are concerned about radio waves. Okay, but all these things are not there when it comes to light fidelity, where you can make use of light without any hesitation. You can make use of light free of cost. Therefore, you can have several applications of light. Say, for example, you go to a petrol bunk tomorrow. What do you see in a petrol bunk? Please do not make use of your phone, where your phone makes use of radio waves. Okay. What if we are making use of light? What if I'm making use of light? Sorry, a good example would be your aeroplanes. Okay. See, whenever you're traveling by flight, whenever you have takeoff or landing, they always ask you to switch off your phones, to not make use of your phones. Why? Because the radio waves which are used for communication may disrupt the flight's communication. There could be disturbance. What if we are making use of light? Then this will not interfere with the flight's communication system with the ATC, with the air traffic control. Say, for example, tomorrow you have intelligent cars, automatic cars. So you have one car, so you have cars traveling one behind the other. So obviously all of them have headlights and tail lights where light is emitted. So cars can communicate with each other, for example. So these are the various applications. Light fidelity is more secure when compared to radio waves. So if you need more security, for secure operations, you can make use of Li-Fi. So these are the various applications and advantages that you can talk or write about when it comes to light fidelity. And finally, you'll end the question by end the answer by saying, is it possible for us? Will there be a future where Li-Fi will replace radio waves? That is very unlikely. It is not that in the recent future light will replace radio waves. Radio waves is pretty ubiquitous. Plus, the main problem with Li-Fi is that light cannot penetrate walls. So if you're in one room and if you need connectivity in the other room, a light bulb in one room will not give you connectivity in the other room. But take Wi-Fi, for example. Wi-Fi, you're in one room where the Wi-Fi router is there, and if you need connectivity in the other room, the Wi-Fi router can still provide connectivity in the other room. So you have disadvantages of light fidelity as well, which ensures that radio waves will continue to be in operation and will not be completely replaced by Li-Fi. I hope you've understood this doubt. We will now move on to the next question. That is the fifth question. What is India's ballistic missile defense program? Also write about India's airborne early warning and control system. So you can start the answer by explaining what is this ballistic missile defense program. Okay. Then you will go into the body of the answer, where you will explain what the ballistic missile defense program consists of and how is it coupled with the airborne early warning and control system. Finally, you can conclude the answer by mentioning the benefits and how it enhances India's defense preparedness. See, what is ballistic missile defense program? this ballistic missile defense program is nothing but an initiative to develop and deploy a multi-layered ballistic missile defense system. It is nothing but an initiative to develop and deploy a multi-layered ballistic missile defense system to protect India from other ballistic missile attacks. So what I'm saying is that, say this is Indian territory, this is some enemy country. Okay, this is some enemy country. Now this enemy country will launch a missile. This enemy country will launch a missile towards India. So how will we counter this missile? We will launch our own missile. We will launch another missile of our own, which will intercept the enemy's missile airborne, and it will destroy this enemy missile before it is able to hit the target in our territory. That is why it is a ballistic missile defense program. I hope you understand what is a ballistic missile. It is not a cruise missile, it is a ballistic missile, where this ballistic missile is used as a defense mechanism to intercept any incoming missiles which may be a threat to our territory. Okay, this is what the ballistic missile defense program is all about. So this ballistic missile defense program consists of two things. One is your PAD, that is Prithvi Air Defense, and the other is your AAD, that is Advanced Air Defense. The Prithvi Air Defense makes use of Pradyumna missiles, whereas Advanced Air Defense makes use of Ashwin missiles. It makes use of Ashwin missiles. So the Prithvi Air Defense, which makes use of Pradyumna, is for high altitude defense. This is for high altitude defense, whereas this is for low altitude defense. Any missile which is launched towards India and is at an altitude of less than 30 kilometers, it will be intercepted by Ashwin missiles. Whereas any missile which is incoming, which is moving towards India at an altitude beyond 30 kilometers and up to 80 kilometers, it will be intercepted by Pradyumna missiles, which is a part of your Prithvi Air Defense. So this is how your ballistic missile defense program is going to protect India from enemy attack by other missiles. Now the other thing is that if you want to make use of ballistic missile defense program where the enemy is launching a missile, it is important that we are monitoring the launch of missiles by other enemy countries. See, first of all, if we have to intercept this missile, we should know that the enemy has launched a missile. Once we determine the launch of the enemy missile, we should be able to track this missile. Only once we are able to track the missile will we be able to launch our own missile to intercept it midway. In order to track that, we need something known as airborne early warning control system. Airborne early warning control system. What is airborne early warning control system? This is nothing but a radar. It is nothing but a radar which is mounted on your aeroplane, which is mounted on an aeroplane. So what will happen is, during an ongoing battle, India will make use of this radar which is mounted on an airplane. Okay, so this will be flying continuously, and since it is a radar, it will be able to detect and monitor the launch of missiles by the enemy. So once it detects the launch of missiles by the enemy, it will pass on the information to the ground station in India. And once the information is received by the ground station will also monitor the launch of the missiles and launch our own missiles to intercept it midway. So the radar mounted on the airplane, which is going to continuously monitor and detect the launch of enemy missiles, is known as airborne early warning and control system. So in India, we are making use of two airborne early warning and control systems. There are, one is Falcon, the other is Netra. We are making use of two radars which are mounted on airplanes. Falcon has been imported from Israel whereas Netra is indigenous development. India has developed Netra. Falcon is mounted on Ilyushin 76 aircrafts, heavy lift aircrafts, whereas Netra, which is an indigenous development, is mounted on the Brazilian Embraer aircraft. Okay, so as of today, apart from USA, Russia, and Israel, India is the only fourth nation to have its own ballistic missile defense program. Apart from USA, Russia, and Israel, India is the only fourth nation to have its ballistic missile defense program. And thanks to this defense program, it enhances our defense capabilities to a very great extent, considering the fact that we are surrounded by hostile nations like Pakistan and China, which gives us a defense mechanism to protect ourselves from any enemy launch missiles which are launched towards India. Okay, so you can just read about Falcon and Netra. Now, Falcon is more developed than Netra. For example, Falcon has 360-degree coverage, whereas Netra has only 240-degree coverage. Falcon provides 400-kilometer range. Netra provides only around 200-kilometer range. So you can simply read about Falcon and Netra as well. Okay, so you can write about all these things and then end by saying that this provides a foolproof defense mechanism for us. Not foolproof, sorry, it helps us with this defense mechanism to protect ourselves from any incoming missiles. Next, the sixth question is about India's national electronic policy. Okay, now this is a very simple and straightforward question. You'll have to explain what is India's electronic policy. Now, since the question talks about analyze, you'll have to mention the salient features of the national electronic policy. So you can start by writing the answer with the objective of the policy. Okay, if you know about the policy, you can start writing the answer by mentioning the objective of the policy. Once you are done writing the objective of the policy, you can start with the salient features of the policy. Once you're done with the salient features of the policy, here the question says analyze. Here the question says analyze. You will write the merits as well as the demerits of the national electronic policy. For example, why did the previous policy fail? That is, you had the national electronic policy 2012. Why did the national electronic 2000 policy 12 fail? So how are we trying to improve upon that with the national electronic policy 2019? How is this better than the previous policy? What is it going to do? How is it going to help India economic development, job creation? What is it going to do? At the same time, what are the demerits of this policy? What are the demerits of this policy, based on which you can give your own suggestions, if possible, to improve the policy or what can be done, and conclude with the answer. See, you have to know that the National Electronic Policy was actually drafted by the Department of Electronics and Information Technology to boost design and manufacturing of electronic systems in India. It was nothing but to boost the design and manufacturing of electronic systems in India, where the National Electronic Policy wanted to give effect to the zero defect policy, the zero defect and zero effect policy of Make in India, as well as the net zero import policy, the net zero import policy under your Digital India scheme, under your Digital India scheme. Okay, so under this National Electronic Policy, the government wants to boost manufacturing of several electronic components. It could be when it comes to your additive manufacturing, which is nothing but your 3D printing. It could be with respect to your semiconductors and integrated circuits. It could be with respect to your fabless chips. It could be with respect to telecommunication, medicine, military, entertainment, photonics, many things. So India wants to leverage the electronics industry, because in 2018, before the policy was launched, the electronic industry in India was around 153 billion US dollars, and by 2025, that is in another 5 years, this is expected to reach 400 billion dollars. Moreover, now talking about self-reliance, Atmanirbhar, India wants to manufacture its own electronics and launch this electronic industry rather than depend upon imports from Taiwan and China. So that is the whole objective of the National Electronic Policy. So if you write these salient features, the merits and demerits of the policy, and give your own constructive criticism or suggestion, then you'll be able to complete the answer and give an overall answer, which will be helpful in fetching you more marks. Okay. So the next question is about, there has been a lot of criticism about India spending millions of rupees on space programs. In this context, examine how space technology aims to promote socio-economic progress or development in India. Now, for you to be able to give a comprehensive answer to this particular question, you should be able to quote examples. Until and unless you're able to give examples, you will not be able to substantiate your answer, no matter what you write when it comes to explaining how ISRO, what space technology is doing for socio-economic development. See, you have to understand that ISRO or space technology caters to many needs, and India's space program is decades old, where it has been developed and it has evolved over the years to meet many needs of India. It has developed to meet many needs of India. That is why you can mention about the India's space program and what are the objectives of India's space program. For example, one is self-reliance when it comes to space program, to develop technology where it can launch its own satellites by manufacturing, by developing its own rockets, to promote peaceful space development and not lead to a space race. So you can give this simple explanation about India's space program. After that, start giving examples to substantiate your answer as to how is India's space program promoting socio-economic progress or development in India. For example, you can give the example of INSAT satellite. INSAT satellite provides for communication and broadcasting. Now, communication obviously is very important for socio-economic progress. It is important for the development of our country. You can take the example of Cartosat. Cartosat is important for mapping. It is important for weather forecasting. It is important for remote sensing. So you can see here, mapping for urban planning, weather forecasting for agriculture, farmers in India, remote sensing for military purpose. So again, you can see it is leading to socio-economic progress, development, as well as security of the nation. You can give the example of IRNSS or Gagan. This is used for navigation, used for positioning, also used for missile guidance. Navigation, for example, navigation is for public use. It is for public use where we don't have to rely upon the American GPS. It can be used by fishermen in India. For positioning, Gagan will provide navigation and positioning to the civil aviation sector in India. So it will help in the civil aviation sector, saving a lot of fuel, because it will provide vertical guidance and reduce the burden on your air traffic control, that is ATC. IRNSS will also provide for missile guidance for Indian military, again for security. You can give the example of GSAT for disaster management. So similarly, you can give many examples. You can give that for education, it is important, for outer space exploration, for space diplomacy, source of income, for cooperation, technology development. All these things actually are benefited thanks to development in our space technology, thanks to development in our space technology. Therefore, we should not worry about spending millions of rupees here, because this is nothing but an investment for our future. Investing in space technology today is an investment for our future, so that in the future we'll be able to reap its benefits. And this is how you'll be able to conclude the answer and say that yes, it promotes and helps in socio-economic progress or development of the country. Eighth question: the oceans have tremendous potential as a renewable source of energy. What are the different ways this energy can be tapped? Okay. How will you start this particular answer? Now, by now, you know that a lot of energy is stored in the oceans. India has a lot of energy requirement. And as a country progresses economically, whenever you have economic development of a nation, the energy requirement of the nation also increases. Hence, the economic development of a country depends upon the availability of energy. If we are not able to produce and supply the required energy, we will be undercutting, or we'll be undermining the economic development, or the capacity of economic development of the country. One way of developing energy, which is also a renewable source of energy, is to tap the energy stored in our oceans. And India has a lot of potential because we have a coast of around 7,000 kilometers. Considering we have a very long coastline of around 7,000 kilometers, India is in a best position to exploit this energy which is present in the oceans. So after you mention this, you can say that we can make use of this energy, where energy in the ocean is stored in two ways: either heat or mechanical. Either heat or mechanical. So this thermal energy or the mechanical energy stored in the ocean's water can be tapped. Once you mention this, just explain the various ways in which energy can be tapped. You can briefly talk about tidal energy. You can talk about wave energy. You can talk about thermal energy, and you can talk about ocean current energy. So these are the different ways in which the potential of oceans can be exploited as a renewable source of energy. Because the question asks what are the different ways this energy can be tapped. If you do have certain figures like how many gigawatts, because it is expected to be around 40 to 60 gigawatts of energy can be exploited in India as of today. So if you take certain locations like the Gulf of Khambar, Kutch in Gujarat, they are very suitable for developing tidal energy. They're very suitable for developing tidal energy. So wherever you have estuaries, for example, they are suitable. They're suitable places for development of ocean energy. So once you have explained that, you can continue with what are the different ways this energy can be tapped, that is tidal, wave, thermal, and ocean current energy. And in case you have any examples for ocean development in Karnataka, you can give that example as well. But as of today, we do not have any successful project which is producing energy in Karnataka at a commercial scale. So in Karnataka, we are not taking up this potential in a serious manner. So therefore, you can conclude by saying that considering the potential and advantages of ocean thermal energy in Karnataka, since we have demand for energy, maybe this could be an answer to meet the energy requirements of coastal areas. Because here you will also have to mention certain merits and demerits of ocean thermal energy. See, what is the potential of it as a renewable source of energy? It will have advantages, it will have disadvantages. For a well-rounded answer, you'll have to mention both. One of the major disadvantages is transportation, transmission of energy. But if you're using this energy for the coastal region, then you don't have to transmit it to a great distance. So therefore, it can be suitably used to meet the energy requirements of coastal regions. And with that, you can conclude the answer. Ninth question says, until e-vehicles become more economic and feasible, vehicles running on CNG may be an alternative. Comment. Okay. Now the question is asking for you to comment, meaning the question wants your opinion. The question wants your opinion as to, until that day when e-vehicles become economical and feasible, can we consider using CNG fuel as an alternative? So then the question is, until we have e-vehicles, why not use petrol or diesel itself? Why are we moving towards CNG? Why are we moving towards CNG? So that is why you can start your answer by saying that CNG is nothing but your methane, compressed natural gas. Compressed natural gas, where when methane is burnt, when combustion of methane takes place, what is released? Carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide and water. So water is nothing but water vapor and carbon dioxide, they are not pollutants as such, but they are only greenhouse gases. They are only greenhouse gases. So when you compare CNG with other fossil fuels, CNG is the cleanest source of fossil fuel. CNG is also a fossil fuel, but when compared to petrol or diesel, fossil fuel, fossil fuel is the cleanest. Sorry, CNG is the cleanest source of fossil fuel when compared to petrol or diesel. Therefore, you can start by writing about CNG as a fuel. So then you can move on to as how CNG fuel is a cleaner source of fuel when compared to petrol or diesel. See, you can mention that electric vehicles as of today are very expensive. Batteries are very expensive. Batteries do not have the capacity. Recharging stations are not available. The range of e-vehicles are still very, very low, and hence they are still not economic and feasible. But until e-vehicles become economic and feasible, it does not mean that we continue with SI engines or IC engines where we burn petrol and diesel and we pollute the environment continuously. Until then, CNG can be a better option because, one, yes, it is a cleaner source of fuel. Second, we do not have to modify the vehicles. Take your present day vehicles, take your petrol or diesel vehicle with certain modifications to the IC engine, with certain modifications to your internal combustion engines. Instead of petrol and diesel, you can use CNG, meaning you don't have to change anything in the car. Slight modifications to the engine, and you will be able to substitute petrol or diesel with CNG. You'll be able to substitute petrol or diesel with CNG, and hence your present day vehicles itself can run on CNG, and hence the amount of pollutants being released into the atmosphere like carbon monoxide, NOx, lead, sulfur oxides, ammonia, everything will come down, and hence it is beneficial. And also we do have enough reserves of methane gas, and it is possible we are entering into several agreements with many other nations to supply us with methane gas. You can give examples of our agreements with Central Asia, where we are entering into deals and agreements to supply India with natural gas so that we are able to replace it or reduce the consumption of petrol and diesel. Finally, you can talk about the few advantages and disadvantages of CNG. I've already mentioned the advantages of CNG. The disadvantages that you can mention about CNG is that CNG has low calorific value. It has low calorific value, meaning that if you take 1 liter of CNG and 1 liter of petrol, petrol will produce more power. It will produce more energy. Therefore, you might have to end up burning a bit more of CNG. The other thing is CNG is a very, very light gas, whereas petrol and diesel is a liquid. Therefore, we'll have to store CNG in a compressed form at a lower temperature, which itself will require energy. Plus, transportation of CNG is more difficult than petrol and diesel. On top of that, CNG very easily escapes into the atmosphere, where CNG, that is nothing but methane, is a very, very potent greenhouse gas. It is equivalent to 23 molecules of carbon dioxide when it comes to trapping heat. Therefore, it is a very, very potent greenhouse gas. So you can write few challenges or disadvantages when it comes to methane. Next question is, India recently announced a genome project. What does this project entail and what is its significance? And what is its significance? Okay. Now, this is a very simple question. Sorry, not a simple question. You'll have to understand what is genome project. So if you're going to start writing this answer, you can start by explaining what is a genome project. What is a genome project? So explain what a genome project is, and you can also mention the World Genome Project, which is also known as the Human Genome Project, which is also known as the Human Genome Project. Once that is done, you can move on to the significance, challenges, and the knowledge intensiveness of the project, and conclude by pointing out the advantages of the genome project, because the question says, what does this project entail and what is its significance? So the advantages of the genome project will answer this part of the question, and when you mention the significance, challenges, and knowledge intensiveness, it will also mention the disadvantages and what the project is going to entail for the country. So first, you will explain what a genome project is. A genome project is nothing but your genome sequencing. Sequencing the DNA of an organism, the genetic sequencing of an organism, be it a plant, bacteria, animal, mammal, reptile, whatever it is. Of whenever you sequence the DNA, so you have a DNA, you have base pairs, you have pairs, right? G, T, A, C. Whenever you determine the sequencing of these nitrogen bases, the sequencing of the nitrogen bases in the DNA is known as genetic sequencing, and this genome project entails the genetic sequencing. So the Human Genome Project was all about sequencing human DNA. Was about sequencing human DNA, where we have more than a billion base pairs. Where we have more than a billion base pairs. So when the first time the human DNA was sequenced, it took more than a decade. It took us around a decade to sequence the entire DNA, but now that has actually come down. So now in India, with IISc and few other IITs, India wants to sequence the human DNA of Indians. We want to sequence the DNA of Indians. And why do we have to do this? What is the objective or what is the significance of conducting or sequencing the DNA of Indians? It is to give us information about genetic diversity in India. It is to give us genetic diversity in India. See, India is a very diverse nation genetically as well. India is a very diverse nation genetically as well. Over centuries, we have received people have poured into the country from different regions, and therefore India is diverse genetically. And if we have it will give us a lot of knowledge. It will give us a lot of knowledge about genetics in India and how we can use this knowledge as a resource in the coming years. For example, in treatment of genetic disorders. Treatment of genetic disorders. So when it comes to genetic disorders, if you want to treat genetic disorders or in a human, you need access to the genetic information of the person. For access to genetic information of a person and in order to treat the person, you should have conducted research into that genetic information and how to treat that genetic disorder for a particular genetic sequence. For that, it is important we conduct this genome project so that we are able to come out with better treatment procedures and processes for treating Indians in India. That is the whole objective. But at the same time, it will obviously have challenges. Why? It is a very expensive process. We'll have to sequence human DNA from different parts of the country. We'll have to collect DNA samples from different parts of the country. People will be not willing for it. People may talk about privacy. What about the storage of genetically acquired data? Who will conduct the research or policies in this particular matter? Is this ethical or not? All these questions will come into picture. Only when you are able to address all these questions will it be possible for us to go ahead with this genome project. But at the same time, it is very important for us to carry on for us to continue with this, considering the advantages of the genome project, where we'll be able to treat Indians such as in cancer and many other diseases in the coming years.